Hi, everybody. Welcome to Real Siblings. It Ain't Easy. We are Donna Reed, and
I'm Eric Seemann, her brother.
We are going to journey back into our small hometown of Lindsey, Ohio. And this is our first episode, and we're going to introduce you to the 4 homes that I lived in.
And 2 homes that I lived in.
Over the 40 years where we were in this little town of just under 500 people. Our goal is to reminisce and share how our lives there were impacted and led us into real estate careers. For me, in Tucson, Arizona.
And I'm in San Antonio, Texas.
So we hope that we will be able to share the love and laughter that we always had and to compare and contrast with where we live now and how it's affected our work. And we also hope that you're going to follow along and that you'll take this journey through the miles and across time with us.
Yeah, and before we go any further, y'all heard that little bit of music at the beginning. That's a shout out to Donna's really talented second oldest son and my nephew, Adam Reed. He performs as Shepherds and Sailors, and we approached him and said, hey, can you put this together for us? And within 24 hours, he had that little ditty put together, and we think it's perfect. Also, our format typically is going to be that we will not be together. This is kind of unusual. We get together once a year as a family reunion, and we are together today in Manhattan, Kansas, despite the fact that we're from Tucson and San Antonio. And finally, our goal is to keep these to about 20 minutes so that it's an easy listen, whether you're doing your dishes, that chore, quick podcast in the car. That's what we're shooting for. So...
Doing the dishes, that's what makes a house a home, right?
That's right.
Yeah, we're going to be good at that. So we're sitting here at our brother Dan's house in Manhattan, Kansas, and what we thought we would start with is just a little bit about where we grew up, the town we grew up in, and what our life was like. And then in future podcasts, we'll be able to, via Zoom, because we won't be together, we'll talk a little bit about the structure of the home, the places we live now, how they relate or don't relate.
Yeah, or don't relate. It's kind of, as we prepared for this and started putting it together and thinking, wow, small town. I joke with people, it's like, no, you don't understand. It's never had a traffic light. It still doesn't even have a blinking light. Very few people even pay attention to the stop signs that are there in town. That's how small Lindsey was.
Yeah.
And I don't think we'd said the name yet. Lindsey.
Oh, did we say we're from Lindsey, Ohio? So we're from a small town. So what's funny about that is I think sometimes when we go back, or I go back, that we've become our parents and our dad. Remember how Dad used to tell us about his small town, who lived in this house, who lived in that house.
And the paper route.
And the paper route, because Eric had a paper route. My brother Ken had a paper route. Brother Dan had a paper route. So who lived in the homes, and kind of dates who lived where when. So as little kids, Eric really little. So the first home that I lived in Lindsey with my parents was built in 1957. It was on Main Street, because every small town
had a Main Street.
Yeah, Main Street. And to just think right off the top of my head, we had 4 or 5 steps up into the front porch, because there was a pretty front porch that faced Main Street, and a single car garage down a long, narrow driveway. Do you remember that? Were you old enough to remember that?
I remember the garage, but single car? I mean, The driveway was single, but didn't it widen out so that it was a 2-car garage? Sorry, a voice from overhead.
So my brother's clapping from upstairs.
Garage.
I don't think it fit 2 cars, but maybe it did. So he's either doing the peace sign or he's telling us it's 2 cars.
Dan would not be sending the peace sign.
All right, so aren't we glad we're filming live with our brother upstairs together? Okay, it was a skinny driveway. Anyway, and then house number 2 was around my 8th grade going to 9th grade year. And
summer of 73, right?
Yeah, that's now. I wonder if Dan's going to tell us otherwise, or I'm going to look up. No, okay. He has now walked back over to
angels overhead.
The angels telling us when we lived in the house. So Dad and Mom were, from what I remember, were working at an auction, doing lunch.
It was an estate auction.
Yeah.
And Dad, from the story that I remember, is we weren't even number 1 or number 2. He was the 3rd bid. And for whatever reason, the first 2 passed on it, and it ended up coming to them.
Yeah.
as the third one.
And all I know is my memory, and again, I don't remember if I remembered or if somebody came home and told me this, that Mom wasn't aware that we were thinking about moving, and that Dad
That
just
sounds probably right.
said I bought a house. And again, so my recollection of that house back in the 70s might have been $18,000. It was
Right, yeah.
really inexpensive.
And when we're talking about this house was a 3-story, I call it a humble second empire house. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, it had 3 stories. The third story had what's referred to as a mansard roof, had the sloped roof, and then flat on top. It had fancy woodwork trim all the way around, 2-story brick. The porches had been replaced by the time we were in it. The original porches were much narrower, more like a stoop.
Yep.
And knowing that the house was built in 1868,
68 is what I think. Yeah.
we know that the kitchen that we used was not originally part of the house. The mudroom, the bathrooms, all of that were added later because 1868, there was not indoor plumbing in Northwest Ohio because, again, we're talking this town of Lindsey. It is hard, even for us, having lived there as much as we did, to think that it had a grocery store. It was worth a bus stop at some time in the 1940s and 50s. That parades through town. There was a restaurant. There was business.
A confectionery. I just learned there was
the
a
confectionery shop that had
that
special candies and restaurants and
hardware store that, honestly, back when people had TVs and fixed them and put tubes in their TVs. I don't know how many TVs were in that when it finally closed. And also where you could go and get penny candy. And I remember
what?
Yeah, I know, penny candy, right? I remember writing, we would charge candy sometimes after school and put it by the cash register in the hardware store.
And Mr. Noss would write it down on the little green and white tablet on Dad's tab, and he ended up. Did he ever charge us back for that?
I don't know whether we ever paid for what we got from there, but yeah. So we talk about the fact that as siblings, we feel like we had a pretty idyllic childhood, and even your wife talks to us about.
My wife Jeannie, she constantly refers to it as like you didn't have a normal childhood. You grew up in Leave It to Beaver Cleaverland.
Yeah.
And I mean, as kids, we were able to go and play at the neighbors and run the streets. We were down the alleys. As we've been going through this, reflecting the fact that we used to climb on our bikes once we could ride our bikes, and we'd be everywhere in town. You'd be down at the creek bed, you'd be in the water, you might be fishing, you might be wading. If it was winter, you were skating on the creek, sledding down the hills, climbing on your bike during the summer. And I mean, a bike was freedom.
So I have to interrupt. The hills was really one hill because it was flat. It was farmland, and it had been part of the Black Swamp, and it was good rich soil and farmland. So sometimes the hills, I remember having my son sled down the entrance to the barn across the street, which was maybe 6 feet tall, but the other thing, because we were talking about riding our bikes, is that we would go out into the country,
right?
And it was a couple of miles out, and then the Ohio Turnpike ran across, and so there was a hill there, and we would go up the hill, and you'd
stop at the bridge.
How many of you did this? Did any of you ever
And it's like the big semi trucks going by, you'd get them to honk your horn. And, again, we're contrasting this. And I think in San Antonio is a big enough city that every pedestrian bridge or bridge that accommodates pedestrians has some sort of screen or grate on it. Because today's day and age, they're throwing things off, or jumping or something along those lines. And here we were riding our bikes on country roads around tractors, farm equipment, sometimes large trucks, semis going through town full of grain, things like that.
Yep.
And we're just climbing on our bikes and going, and 2.5 miles. There were hours that we never even checked in. I mean, you'd leave the house in the morning during the summer, and you'd come home at noon, maybe, if you weren't eating at a friend's house, right? And there was a telephone call to mom.
maybe they cared where you were. Maybe they didn't worry about it. One time, so my kids also, I lived in 2 additional homes because I married and moved back there and lived there for another 20 years. And so my boys also grew up in this town, and they one time, after we moved to Tucson, they drew a picture of the town on a cocktail napkin. napkin.
The whole town on a
napkin.
cocktail?
On a cocktail nap. I can't even say that word. Cocktail napkin. Anyway, I remember I thought,
You need another drink.
I'm drinking water, I swear. How do you draw the whole town on a napkin? And well, because it's not very big.
I mean, again, thinking back to some of what I had said about the fact that it had a restaurant, it was a bus stop, you had businesses in town, you had the local post office, but there was a school in town. We called it was the Washington Township School.
I called it Lindsey School. I call it Washington Township.
Right. We were at the Lindsey Elementary is what it was when I was in school there. But as a township school, it was beyond first grade. And I don't even know. What did you have before first grade? We had kindergarten, but before
For
the
me,
kindergarten,
it was story hour.
Story hour. That's right.
Yeah.
So you had story hour. Then I had kindergarten. We were in first grade. You were there, though, through to 8th grade because it wasn't part of the incorporated school district until I got into school.
And then all of the little farm towns came together, and we went to the big city, which was maybe 17,000 people,
Right.
I don't know, for school. But we went from class sizes, for me, of 22 to 25 kids, and suddenly I had a graduating class of 560, 570 students.
The town had already started to get small enough by the time I was there. My class that I figure I had 6 girls and 5 guys. We had 11.
Really
had
small.
11 in our class.
Wow.
And then my graduating class was only 390 at Ross by the time I graduated. So it was.
Well, the other thing that's kind of funny, everybody, is it's a farm town, right? And our dad was a farmer. He grew up a farmer. We didn't. We were townies. So I remember, our friends were in the country, so we could ride our bikes into the country. But I remember Dad and I having a conversation one time about the fact that I asked something about farming, and he's like, I can't believe you lived here all your life and you don't know this. It had to do with tile and drainage in a field. And I thought,
which, when I was first brought up to me, it's like, what do you mean you're putting tile in a field? And it wasn't until years later that I knew what that
one.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But Dad had an agriculture degree. He was a Buckeye. He had gone to Ohio State, graduated in 56. So he had, what does that make it? 53, 54, 55, 55. No, he started in 52. 1952.
We're doing math. Yeah.
and right before, for everybody who's a Buckeye, I think it was right before Woody Hayes started as coach. He started about the time that Dad graduated is when Woody had started down there.
Yeah. So we wind up in this little town, and so bringing it back to the fact of what we do now. So when you're a kid, I think you just live in your house, right? You don't pay attention. I do remember that our dad was frugal, which is my polite word for cheap. And so when he came home and they bought this really old house, we had layers of wallpaper to scrape, and there was no steamer. It was like sponge, scrape.
Yep, we all had a putty knife and we all scraped. Even at that point, I was 7, going to be 8 years old. So I was down on the floor. I got the low boards at that point, the low part of the wall.
Yeah. So Dad, it was a remodel, the summer of 73. And a remodel. I have to tell you that when I used to trick or treat at this house, it was like a scary house. It was like, because old people lived there, and you would it was almost like you'd be dared to go up on the porch to go trick or treating there.
No lights, big porch.
Yeah. And so that summer there was a lot of work done, and our dad was quite good with tools, so he did a lot of work himself. And then I started 9th grade in that house. Yeah. So as I went, I was in 9th. How old were you when we moved into that house?
Oh, that's what I say. It was 73. I turned 8. Actually, I think we moved in one of the highlight stories of the famous, I was homesick. The night that we moved in, I got sick. And I threw up, and great story, right?
Aren't you glad to know this?
I got sick enough that my oldest brother, Dan, grabbed me out of the top bunk and was carrying me out of the room, because all 3 of us boys had to share. I mean, it was this huge house, but the 3 boys had to share one room.
I got my own. I was the only girl.
We had brand new 1-inch blue shag carpet, very 1970s.
I had purple shag.
And I permanently stained it that night. Yeah.
Wow. See, we all have different memories. And so then, all right.
Camera slide.
Perfection. The camera just slid down. So as we move forward with this, we're going to hope we get professional. And we're going to talk a little bit about, okay, yeah, it was a brick house. It was 3 layers of brick and, well insulated. And the only air conditioner we had was a room air conditioner and that fan upstairs in the orange shag carpet room, in that window. And what's that like now compared to living in San Antonio or a house in Tucson? The construction, the flexibility of our life, what we were allowed to do.
And I
not
mean,
to do.
this was a 2-story house, and my dad, in part of his big renovation plans for it, added a half bathroom, toilet and sink in the upstairs of this house, which had not existed.
Right.
And at the time, that made no impression on me at all. But considering today, buyers, what do you expect? Well, we need at least 3 bedrooms. We need 2 full baths. We need a master suite. We need an open concept. And this 1868 house was 2 stories. It had a steep, narrow staircase. It had no ensuite. I mean,
No. Ensuite was not a word we used.
My parents still thinking Dad's whole closet for all of his clothes was only about 3.5 foot wide in the master bedroom.
I think Mom built an extra little closet.
He did. He built both of the closets. The one that Mom had, which was huge, which was twice the size of his, had sliding doors, and then it's very, very different to think that we go from that to I live and work in San Antonio. That's the 7th largest city in the country. We're metropolitan area now is over 2 million people. When I moved there, close enough to the school, my daughters could have walked to grade school, and I never, ever would have even dreamed letting them walk to school because that was the huge, big city at that point.
Yeah. And my kids, when we moved to Tucson, we were kind of close to the school, and Caleb would rollerblade now and then. I think it was illegal. I'm not sure he was supposed to. And he got chased by javelina sometime, which we can talk about desert animals in a future podcast. But
I've got tarantulas. Do you have tarantulas?
We have tarantulas, yeah. It's so that's our goal. Our goal is to bring you a little bit by bit, maybe about the construction of the house, and then about the outdoor, and maybe about the things that gave us allergies in different places where we live, and how that relates to what the world is like now. Every couple of weeks, that's what we're sort of hoping.
Right. Every couple of weeks, we plan on posting this. But of course, technology, we're learning this as we go.
Can you tell, like when the camera fell? Yeah.
We're going to put it together. But we want to thank you for just joining us for this few minutes right now. And as we wrap up, wanted to say thank you for listening, taking time out of your day. Hopefully this gets projected and someone listens to it. And we know we've been reminiscing and reflecting and looking at ourselves. It's going to be different when we're not side by side.
That's true.
Life in a small town, it impacted our lives. I have a chance to train every once in a while, and I talk about your paradigm, and it really is hard to step out of our box of growing up in that small town.
Like lock your doors.
Yeah, but it's impacted our careers in real estate. So our goal, though, is remember that we're here to help you find that property that's going to be your home, where you get to create the lasting memories that we've had a chance to create. It seems simple. It isn't always easy. And until next time, I'm Eric.
And I'm Donna.
And we are
Real Siblings.